Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. I would say I've been a little bit of getting tired here, so I've had to reflect a bit on whether I need a rest week or maybe a few days off.
Well, good news, because today is the Rest Week Q&A, where we are answering all of the burning questions about rest weeks.
Mm-hmm. And this is the time in the summer, the typical cycling part of the year, I guess. You know, is this Western or like Northern Hemisphere centric that we're in this summer, I guess. But people have been having good weather, they've been maybe racing, and then they're finding maybe they're plateauing is a word we might hear, or just things aren't going as well. They're getting injuries, they're burning out, there's fatigue. And so we often look and then it's, you haven't taken a rest day since 1996. And then we try and adapt that. So that's what we're going to talk about, is a few different questions that have come in around rest weeks, rest days. Why do we do them? What do we do during the rest weeks? Why do you call it a rest week if you don't? Or if you have to still ride, that doesn't sound restful if I'm still riding. So a few iterations on that. But otherwise, how is your training going?
My training is going pretty well. It's a little, I'm not going to lie, it's a little hectic with the Tour de France. So if anyone is paying attention to the Tour de France or wants to be paying attention to it but does not have the time to watch the stages, over on Bicycling Magazine's website, myself and a few other editors there are recapping and just kind of quick highlighting, a 5-minute video of here's our top moments from the stage, kind of really nerding out on them. So frankly, between us, if you want to go out on your next group ride and pretend that you watched today's stage, I recommend checking out bicycling.com and just watching the video where we're recapping kind of what the most interesting thing is, what we're taking from it. Because that's going to make you sound like you watched the whole thing and that you totally know what's going on.
Akin to some of these newsletters like the Skim or these that give you the world news or I don't know, things that are going on in the world.
Exactly. We're helping you be informed about the Tour de France when you do not have time to watch.
Now you have a series of events here, not to go, so you're doing this with bicycling. There's a bit of print. There's a bit of video content that the listeners can check out via bicycling. And this is for the Tour de France. And then you're also going to do women's coverage.
Yes, so I'll also be doing the exact same thing for the Tour de France Femmes. And while right now I'm only doing a few of the stages of the Tour, I'll be doing every stage of the Tour de France Femmes. I also have another exciting project that has not been announced yet, but will be next week.
I didn't know if that one was coming, so I didn't want to spoil
coming out around Tour de France Femmes, which I'm very excited about.
And that's sort of like late July into early August is when that's running?
Yes, that one starts.
How long is it this year?
9 stages.
Okay, that's exciting.
Starting July 26th, I want to say. It's Saturday, which is either the 25th or 26th.
So that's also at Bicycling, the coverage you can tell us about?
Yes. Okay. So same thing, bicycling.com. You can find that under the Tour de France tab. And actually I'll be also at the Rooted Mountain Bike Festival in upstate New York, Bemis Point, if anyone is familiar, Thursday through Sunday, the 24th to 27th, and doing a couple things there with Strong Girl Publishing, with Shred Girls, and we'll actually host a watch party for stage 1 if you happen to be around.
So I'll try and find links to the bicycling coverage for both Tour de France races, and then also they Rooted New York?
Rooted MTB.
Yeah. Okay. And then also this coming weekend, I believe that's true because we're releasing this on a Tuesday. So the coming weekend, which is the 12th and 13th, I think. But I think the 12th is the day of this.
No, it'd be the 19th. Yesterday, or 2 days ago was the 12th.
Right.
You've lost a week.
Summer is going by. So yes, the 19th, the Saturday here close to us in Collingwood, you're doing, you're part of an event with our friends over at N89, which they run running events. So they're doing a running workshop weekend type event that Molly is doing a climbing seminar and also what is this called? A talk.
Panel discussion?
Panel discussion is what I'm looking for. There's a group of people doing a talk, question and answer. So if I think the deadline may have passed by the time this podcast came out, but I bet you if you email Molly or N89 and say you listen to the podcast, maybe they'll slide you into it if you're local and want to do some running. The price seemed really good and it seems like a nice packed day and a beautiful venue over at Devil's Glen. So check that out.
Yeah. And before we get into our questions about rest days, rest weeks, etc., quick word for our sponsor. We're talking about Payable apps. So again, if you've been listening to us for a while, this is our favorite way to accept payments because you can just do your payments within a Google form. So it is super simple, super slick. You don't need any extra software or logins or anything like that. You just need your Google account. You've probably made a form in the past. So if you need to collect money for Girl Scout cookies, raise money for the local animal shelter, take, event registration for your, local weekly run series, t-shirt sales, pretty much whatever you would use a Google form to collect information for. Now you can also take payments in it.
And I'll say, as a volunteer in a couple local clubs and things like that, the amount of admin time that gets saved by this platform, you get it running. There's a bit of connections because you have to connect your Square or your PayPal to this Google form, but it's ultimately not very much time. If you email us, I'll help you. But it is just so good. We are running our club full membership off of this. We're running our weekly club social ride registration off of this. And then we've done jersey orders, mug orders using this as well. And so it's just at the end of the week, you look, there's a list in a Google sheet, and those are the people that are buying your mug, and you already have money in your PayPal or your Square. So it's just so good, especially in that volunteer application, but also any of these small businesses or side hustles are going to just love this application and the simplicity of it.
Yeah, and the nice thing is there's no subscription fees or anything like that. They only get paid when you do. It's just a tiny percentage. So really, it's honestly the most cost-effective way to do stuff like this. Really just, simplifies everything. You can find out more at payableapps.com/athlete, where we also have a full library of templates for Google Forms. So you can just get started and pretty much be up and running in under 10 minutes.
Awesome. Let's talk rest weeks.
Let's talk rest weeks. Let's maybe just start with some definitions here. Let's talk rest days versus rest weeks, possibly even versus a down week. And maybe this is just a slight, way a coach would talk about it. But for example, I'm actually about to start I have a rest day today, and I'm about to start a down week coming up.
When do you start it?
Today.
Oh, really? So it starts on is today Monday? Yeah, today's Monday. So, okay. Yeah. So down, sometimes you'll hear the word deload is what I use with coaching. The coached athletes I use, but for training plans, I usually use rest weeks. And I basically use them for the exact same week. But I found with the coached athletes, there was a lot of grumbling about the sort of things I alluded to, where it's, why am I training during the rest week? I thought I was resting. And it's, you're sort of deloading, or you said a down. Your training load is down a little bit this week. And sometimes it's preparing for a race or after a really big event or a big push of a week. Other weeks, it's just preventative almost, because we load for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, and then we take a down week, a deload week, a rest week, where we just reduce things. And that can be the volume. It usually is a bit of volume, a bit of intensity decrease, maybe a bit of frequency decrease, but not always. It can just be even one of those things in any of these iterations. So there's no strict textbook sense, but the idea would be that we're undulating the training load. Each month, each week, we undulate this, because we go rest day, and then there's a long day, and then there's a hard day, and then there's a medium day, and then maybe another rest day, hard day, long day, rest day. And so you have this undulation, and that's good training, that there's a bit of variety in the training, because then you can hit some of the intensity, and then you can hit some of the duration, which are sort of the two drivers of training adaptation.
Yeah. And how do you think about the difference between a rest week in a training block versus the rest or recovery week following a big race?
I guess they're ultimately the same.
I'm going to argue with you, because you probably wouldn't have an athlete doing any kind of testing during a post-race week.
Well, and that brings up, so that's another big reason. We just got that question this past week, twice actually. It's sort of this, because a test can be very stressful for some people. So we're talking about a field test, or really we only do field testing, but this could be on Zwift. Maybe you do some sort of Zwift event, or the Zwift time trial up the Zwift, Alp to Zwift. Or it could be maybe you actually go for physiological testing or lab testing. You get a lactate test, a VO2 max test. That wouldn't be usually every month or mesocycle, but every, half or quarter, some athletes might go and do something like that, especially if their coaches are really into physiological testing.
To be clear, we tend to not be.
Yeah. And again, we're not into it. So we're not into it, I guess. But we've talked about that in the past, and we do sometimes refer people out for testing like that. And again, some coaches are just, that's what they do and that's their system. And I think the important thing, whether you're following a training plan or having coaching, is that you buy into that system. And so my system has frequent rest weeks, and we do fairly frequent field tests of different types. They're not always the same, but there are two things that I think are just important that we do. And some of it is to get information. We test in those rest weeks, or you could call them test weeks or down weeks or deload weeks, to just go through the motions of getting assessed. Because to me, that's one of the big things in racing, is that people, everyone struggles with this self-talk, with this mental anguish, the start line fears, the Molly in the van before the race saying she's quitting the sport and doesn't know why she does this.
Never doing it again.
And then sprints off the line and attacks everyone viciously. So
I can be done faster, so I never have to do it again.
So whether or not that would help Molly specifically, it's unclear. I don't think Molly really struggles that much with, like, it doesn't affect your results, but there's some people for whom it like they're vomiting, they're not eating enough, they've underperformed because of this race time. So to me, the frequent testing is we're going through the motions of, today it's the best you have, do what you can. And so some people will just quit. Oh no, last time I had 220 watts and this one's 217, so I'm quitting. And it's like, well, no, because on race day, sometimes all you have is 217 watts and you need to work with the cards that you have. So I really think that the testing is important, but that's a great point. I guess you asked the question, like, what's the difference between after a race, we take a rest week or two, or just your regularly scheduled deload week or down week or rest week. So I guess that's a difference. You might not do testing or might not do as severe of testing, certainly right after a race, because you're probably going to be tired. That would be a thing for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of a bit of definition. So to recap, when we're talking about rest weeks, you might have heard it called a down week, a deload week, a recovery week, something like that. And we're talking about rest weeks that are built into your schedule, not necessarily immediately following your race. Like, kind of assume that after your big race, yes, you are going to have a rest week, but that one is probably going to be that's actually going to be more of like the rest week that you envision when you see rest week on your schedule, where it's like, you don't need to do anything. You can maybe pedal to the ice cream shop or the coffee shop and just kind of like, basically you're chilling and maybe doing a bit of movement as it feels good. But in, say, like a 12-week block leading up to your race, the rest week is still a structured week. Like, there still are training things. It might be lighter, but you're still following a training plan, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah. So you might deload on the focus. Again, the intensity, the volume, the frequency of training will probably come down after that race. So someone I coach just did a big push, like multi-month push to do race in Maine, 100K mountain bike race. It was a big effort. And so this whole week is like a couple days right off, and then like your choice. So then the athlete decides. A lot of athletes will decide to go back out on their bike. And if you ask the coach, they'd probably say, I think you probably take another day or two rest. But you want to, the athlete should have some choice. And so it's even just like providing that choice in the rest week, that you're not being told what to do. And if you want to go get ice cream, or if you want to go on the local group ride, it's probably fine. But we want to make sure that we are recovered. And that would be the argument to include a bit of intensity towards the end of the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days that might be in this rest week, is to just sort of do something like a test or a light interval workout to get a sense of like, are you recovered and ready to go? Because that's really what you're waiting for, is this sign that you've recovered and you've come back to baseline. The mistake most people, and I'll say most people, but well, maybe it's many people, is like they don't wait, or they just don't schedule these off weeks, certainly after the race, but just even every 3 or 4 weeks. And certainly the rest day is super controversial with athletes. Most athletes hate rest days where they do nothing.
I don't understand those athletes.
Yeah.
I live for those days. I live for these days. Mondays are my rest days, which is when we record. So
yeah, and so you'll see these things like run streaks, and we're not like adding anyone here. Like, if this is what you're into, like, just do you. It's okay. But if you start finding you're not making progress or reaching your goals, or you're getting injured frequently or ill frequently, these would be things to look at, is that like pre-programmed rest day, because we assume that it's going to help avoid injury, burnout, energy availability issues down the road. If just like every Monday, we just take it off, whether it's a nice day or we feel energetic or whatever, we take the day off, and then we're a little hungrier to train, or a little more motivated, I should say. We're hopefully not hungry because we're well fed. We've slept, our gear is all working. And so this just over time is better training, because you keep coming back ready to do the intensity and to do the volume that's required to progress. What you'll see is, if it's the same as doing intensity every day, you end up just regressing to the mean and getting tired over time and not getting speedy is the dilemma, right?
Well, I think the thing with rest days and rest weeks is there's two ways to have them. They're either planned or they're unplanned. And if you don't plan them, they're going to happen. And it's going to be because you overdid and now you need a rest week. So it's actually like, the goal is to be getting on your rest week with a little bit left in the tank, so you didn't need it that day.
And I think you could argue, so that's like the no pain, no gain. Like, people think that you need to be vomiting every time you work out, but we could extend that to, we don't take rest days till we just are injured or burnt out and just like can't get on our bike, like can't physically walk out the door. And so the argument would be that we actually don't want to have that much disruption to our body, and we want to just keep having good training sessions. And most of the time we should try and feel decent in our training. And so that's like a paradigm shift, because a lot of us think that it's this like suffer sort of fest all the time. So that would be the idea, is to try and have that at least once weekly. You'll see for older athletes or people who are injury prone, have a history of injury, taking even 2 rest days a week being advised, or at least including maybe a bit of, for your runners, certainly like a bit more cross training in the program, because they have trouble absorbing that impact. They feel like junk all the time. Well, okay, let's try a bike instead of one of your runs. Oh, now I actually am recovering from the impact. Which is the little more nebulous thing, is like there is different types of fatigue. So for like runners, there may be like a muscular fatigue that lasts a bit longer. So then again, where cross training might let you continue to get a cardiovascular stimulus while still recovering maybe. But again, it's a slippery slope where you're saying, oh, well, I'll just bike or do strength on my rest day. Well, that's not quite the same as a rest day. There still is load there. So that's the tricky thing that you'll see, especially cyclists will try and do that. Well, they'll put their strength always on their rest days. And it's okay, because I get it, because like maybe the strength training isn't very hard, but then you're like, could we go harder on the strength training and get more benefit? Like, is that sort of, again, just regressing to the mean, where everything's just sort of not a big stimulus, not a big training push? And then we're also not recovering, right? So you have the option of like pushing hard and then recovering, or just regressing to the mean and just being moderate and not enough stimulus probably a lot of time. Someone might ask, what's the difference between this expert level or elite level power, where someone goes from 220 watts up to maybe 280? That's like very common in the adult masters sort of grouping. But to get up to that, whatever the hump is, it doesn't matter what your power is now. But if you've been in that same sort of rough threshold power for a long time, to get to the next level is often harder workouts, yes, longer workouts, yes, but you also have to recover. And so it's giving up the idea of a streak or riding 7 times in a week versus 5 times in a week potentially. And we don't all have that focus or that energy or that time availability, but that often is the next level, right? Is to get away from that regression to the mean.
Well, and you say like a lot of people don't have that time. I would actually argue, like, yes, certainly, but a lot of people are just afraid of taking a rest week. And I've talked about this before. You can't go hard unless you're going easy. Obviously, you need to recover. But I would say, like, personally, I struggle with recovery weeks, rest weeks, not because I hate doing nothing, but because I enjoy doing nothing too much. Mm-hmm.
For sure. And we can joke, there's sort of, oh, I'm worried I won't get back started. And then for some people, there's a legitimate past there whether there was eating disorders or someone was very inactive or very unhealthy in the past. And so they just don't want to go back down that road. So you can see where this would get like very complicated. And again, we could consult with a sports psychologist, if not a therapist or counselor as well.
Well, and I think there is like some simpler stuff to be done even ahead of that, where it is like, okay, say normally you train on the bike 12 hours a week. Your rest week is you're actually down to like, say, 5 hours of on bike time. You can still, make up that time with like walks or, some yoga classes, cleaning your bike.
You could, but I would say for some people, it's worth the exercise to see the number 5 and not add more activity.
Fair enough.
Because there's some people that are stuck at like every week has to be, again, it's just a run streak. Like there has to be 7 runs. So it's no different to say there has to be 12 hours or 15 hours of training or whatever the hours are that are going to make you enough. That I think is worth exploring with a sports psychologist, if not a therapist, which is tough. But I think there's light on the other side of that where it frees you up that you do 5 and then you do the best 12 or 14 or 17 hours of your life on the backside of that. And so it is this like wave undulation in the same way that we don't train 5 hours every day. It's lots of, I say, unremarkable workouts, a couple rest days, and then maybe a long one on the weekend and maybe a hard one on the weekend. And that's just like a great week of training. So that's sort of like the switch that we make, is to try and get that in there. And what I'll often do with athletes too, especially if they are the ones that like they feel like they need to deserve it, is there can be that, I call it the big adventure to finish the block, where we just put a bit more of a push in that second or third week of the training block before the rest week. And we say on Saturday, we're going to do this, whatever big is. Again, being careful that it's not so big that now this is an event and the recovery is going to be really long on it. Because I think what you'd like to see is by the time we get, for working people, it just works so well that like every fourth week, your weekdays are just a little freer. You don't have to be cramming a 6 a.m. workout in and then running to soccer practice and then making dinner and then in bed for 10:30 and then up at 5 a.m. Just sleep in a couple days during the week. You might even still go ride most of those days to keep your frequency and the routine up, but you can go out at 7 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. or whatever the idea is, and just spin for 30 or 60 minute low focus. Maybe a few have like some drills or like a quick test or something in it. And then once you get to the weekend, a lot of times I'll actually start training again on the weekend. It might have a test on the Saturday as part of like a bigger ride. Like just go hard on your mountain bike for 5 minutes and then you're up at the trails and then do whatever you want for 2 hours or 3 hours. And then Sunday back at your longer endurance ride, right? So a lot of people, assuming it's not a big training block beforehand or a race beforehand, a lot of times even that 4 or 5 days during the week where we just eat and sleep and don't push the training so hard is enough to get back on it. Like the week is sort of like a misnomer because sometimes it needs to be longer and sometimes it is only 3 or 4 or 5 days during the week. And then again, the training, the weekend is back to sort of training.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned 3 sort of key things there. Number 1 being, you're completely right when I say like, oh, you can do all of these other things. Probably better if you're the kind of person who needs to count those to make them happen, maybe skip them and see how you feel. But I think, everyone can still go on like walks. You don't need to be like at home all the time. But the other key points here you mentioned are eating and sleeping. And I think the common mistake, and I know I make it with rest weeks, is, this is a good time to catch up on XYZ. And yes, obviously there is some amount of catching up that needs to happen, work, family life, etc. But if your rest week is so mentally taxing and like has so many things in it that you actually finish the week more tired, having gotten less sleep, feeling really crappy because you're like on the go trying to do all of these like life things, that's actually not a very effective rest week, I would say, from a fitness perspective. And then fueling, the other mistake I think, I've certainly been guilty of in the past is, down week, this is the chance to, try that juice cleanse, try that fast, try that, like really clean up the diet. And I'm using so many air quotes around this as I said that. But I think it's like the natural inclination of anyone that's had any kind of like weight stuff, we'll say, to be like, rest week, I can drop down the calories. But again, that is not going to be helpful. for getting back going.
Well, and recovering and rebuilding, right? Like the concept is that these rest days and rest weeks are when the body is adapting. It's coming back up to its baseline so that then you can put in another dig and try and get up to like another level. But you have to remember that when we do these training blocks, you're usually getting less and less ready to train. Your readiness is decreasing. Your fatigue is increasing. So that's what you're doing during these. So if you started fasting, or just partying all night and cramming all the work you didn't do or something into it, then this is affecting how long it's going to take to get back recovered. And this is again where we can be flexible with that, how long we take for a rest week. We might not always need the full week, and that's okay. But that is the idea. So even with the rest days, you'll see that same thing where it's like, well, I'll fast. And that was really popular a few years ago, right before everyone went high carb everything, was to do, you would fast on the Thursday night because the Friday was a low training day. It wasn't very much. So then you just like not eat through till Friday at noon and do your morning workout fasted.
Or worse, you wouldn't eat till Saturday. So you'd get in like 36 or like 48 hours. There was a lot of weird math that was going on a few years ago.
The ideal they were looking at was that like Friday night you'd then start like fueling for the Saturday ride, more so. And
no, I know a lot of people that were very into like you'd stop eating after your ride on Sunday.
Right.
And then you'd go rest day Monday. You'd go through till like Tuesday afternoon. Yeah, it was not good.
There was weird stuff. That. Yeah. So and it's just, what that's doing is it's decreasing the amount of work you're going to do. So I think we're past that mostly, in most cases, but that's, I think what we want to be careful with is definitely like we're fueling those rest days. And I think you can still, like, the athlete's plate is sort of like a rough template that you'll see where there's a bigger proportion of vegetables, and that can include things like sweet potatoes and beets and things like that. But there's still a portion, maybe a quarter of the plate that's rice, and then a quarter of the plate that might be proteins. And so I think that's like a useful framework. And then when we go to the heavier days, the longer days, then that portion of carbohydrate increases, and especially on the longer training days, there's a little less vegetable matter, fiber matter on those plates. And so I think sometimes that's like an interesting template that if someone wanted to go deeper on, they could, and maybe even consult with a nutritionist if they were going to get really fancy with their diet. But for a lot of people, I think it's just a good, nice plate with a mix of colors and a bit of carb and a bit of protein, and they'll probably do okay just sort of keeping it fairly steady. And then again, that's sort of like another next level thing that you could do is sort of like fueling for the work required and some of that undulation.
For sure. All right. Any other mistakes you can think of that people make in their rest week?
Well, I thought there's an article I'll link as well with your coach, David. And I like sometimes highlighting these other coaches doing stuff. We do use David a fair bit, I think, because he's written a lot as well, and they podcast as well. So it is nice. I think he's a good coach, but I also don't agree with David on a lot of things. So sometimes it's good to say like, well, I don't even necessarily agree with everything, but like they're saying the same thing. And so sometimes I'll put these in just because it's like, don't take my word for it. Like look it up, like find a place that says rest days are stupid. Like that doesn't really exist, right? Like find the evidence where it's like, someone didn't take rest weeks ever and they're doing great, and then certainly across time that you'd see that. So we'll link to David's article, and it's sort of this idea that like I think you were resting. Do you have it on the thing there? It was like 26% of the year is a rest.
23% of the year.
And so his math was 52 days of the year, and then you take like
52 weeks.
52, but there's a day in each of those weeks, so 52. And then after like a big race, he had a formula. I think it was for every 10 miles of running racing was taking 2 days,
1 to 2 days,
1 to 2 days. And
so if you did like 100 miler, that's like 10 to 20 days off.
Right. And so I was trying to do that math with like biking, where it's like if you're doing a 24-hour bike race, it might be akin to that. And you could debate things around like impact, but I think cyclists often like get away with things where they forget that like you're still up all night. You've just completely depleted your body. You didn't, there's just all these factors. So,
well, and even that's a pretty tricky math equation too, even for that, like 1 to 2 days off per 10 miles of racing, because that's a distance, not a time. So, I said to you the other day, I actually felt like I recovered a lot faster from this past 100 miler because I finished it in, just over 17 hours versus the other one, which was like just under 24.
Right.
Like that's 7 hours less on your feet. So even though the time was even though the distance was the same, the time is different. So,
right.
I mean, there's some people where a 50K, 30-mile run could crack them for 2 weeks.
Well, and there's so many factors. Yeah.
But like that, David would have me running again in 2 days if everything went fine.
It could, yeah. And you didn't miss the night of sleep, really, right? It wasn't really that disruptive. The weather conditions weren't like super depleting. Like you weren't in like the most vicious world championship sprint where like just crush. You went pretty deep, but not like maybe there would be another like level of deepness we could have gone. So you'll see that. And so that would be sometimes the pushback I get is like, well, I just did the mountain bike stage race and it was for fun. It wasn't like I wasn't like going to the max every day, but it's like, well, you did ride 40 hours in 7 days. So probably we should respect that in some manner. So there's just sort of like, you need to take like at least a week or two off after these massive things. So if it sounds like Unbound or Stage Race or Leadville, there's usually like a good week that I would say you're not doing a lot. And then there's probably another week that's just sort of like easing back. Maybe in the case of running, you're like easing into running. But yeah, like Molly says, there's so many factors on the person and everything else. But David makes the point that like, that's probably where most people end up screwing themselves up is they stack too many, right? I have to get back and do this next big race and this next big race and this next big race. And it's a great Instagram thing for a while where it's like, you did 72 marathons in a year, but then the luck runs out pretty quickly, right?
For sure.
And the problem with Instagram is you don't really see it. It's just like, oh, they have a stress fracture down the road. Isn't that sad? But it's hard to look back and be like, well, they ran 72 marathons in a year. And I'm exaggerating, but that would be how many mountain bike stage races can you do in a year, or how many 100-mile running races or 50-mile running races in a year? So that would be the caution there. So you take the time after the big races, the big blocks, the events, and you respect that. A day or two after most events, and then easing back into training that next week. You talked about like a rest week that's after an event versus a rest week in a training block. And then he talks a bit about off season, which we're actually really aligned on, and that most people's off season doesn't need to be a season. It doesn't need to be 3 months, but is maybe a week or two if we've done a great job on rest days and rest weeks throughout the year. We don't need a lot. We can be training consistently and accumulate more training throughout the year. And that's how we get, again, unlocking these next levels of performances. We don't just stop the sport for the entire winter and then come back and be cyclists. We continue training. Certainly there could be cross training in there, but you're an athlete throughout the year.
Yeah. And it's funny. This is, one of those things that I would say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we would have said the same thing about the off season, but we would have said, yes, all of the pros take these like 3-month off seasons. You're seeing a lot of pros take the off seasons. They're like gaining 20 pounds, whatever. You don't see that anymore. Like I'd say there are very few pro cyclists that take more than this couple week off season. I think training like science has come around on shorter, like full on off season is just
could be
the
that
norm
everyone's
now.
eating again.
Oh, shocker. Yeah.
Could be that we're eating. You'll see a little mix. You'll see up to like 6 weeks in some people's case. And sometimes when they say an off season, it means they're not touching the bike for 6 weeks or they're not running for 6 weeks. But then you'll find out, but I also was cross country skiing 20 hours a week out in the mountains or bike packing. They're maybe they just went off grid so it's sometimes deceiving what someone might call an off season. But I think that like 2 weeks where you just don't really think about it. And you like veg out a little bit. I think most people could go with that. And a lot of times that's well placed after the big race of the season. That's often where that'll happen, right? So then that sort of like counts as that rest week is also the off season after that. Maybe it's in September or October for a lot of people.
Well, being as we're like right in the middle of summer, we've now got everyone like dreaming about the off season. Any other things to add on rest week, rest days, as people are still very much in the midst of their seasons?
I don't think so. I think maybe as I look at our list here, the only other piece that was in there was just sort of like, what tests do you do and like, why do you test? And so I mentioned the race nerves, but I don't know if we talked completely about the test you do. I'm pretty whatever, but I think it's worth seeing progress for most people on something. So we'll use something like a MAF test, which is just 30 minutes of sub-maximal. You could call it a zone 2 test where you see what is your power or your speed or your pace running under 75%, or you can look up the MAF test and do it that way too, is sort of different. So you have a set heart rate, how fast can you run? And so over time, we would hope that that gradually improves, right? Your aerobic system improves. Most people can see that improve. And it's really not a stressful test once you figure it out. It's actually sort of boring and, you're just sort of like running slowly in some cases to get that. So that's one we really like, and I use with a lot of people. Not every time we hit a rest week, but like consistent, because it's just a zone 2 ride. It's really not that big of a deal. You're just paying a bit more attention. And then we do a lot of 5-minute tests for our mountain bikers, people who have climbing goals. We see how fast can you go in 5 minutes up a hill. Again, it's short. Most people have something that's around 5 minutes, somewhat close to them, or like maybe 1 minute on flat and 4 minutes on a climb. And that's a good one. I like it for the mountain bike one. It sort of maybe approximates like a VO2 max or max aerobic power type power output. And then, of course, there's your 20 to 30 to 60 minute type time trials as well. And those are sort of the base ones we use to try and get that. So you sort of get a threshold of VO2 max. And then if we could call that aerobic one sort of like the aerobic threshold, it sort of now gives you like those 3 sort of points that we can sort of compare, contrast. And again, depending on the athlete's goal or limiter or what they're training, you can decide, like, do we do all of them? Usually not. And which ones are important for this season, this training block, this phase, the goals they have. So that's sort of what I would do. But I do like it because it gives you something else that's just for you. You don't have to tell anyone about it. Maybe you tell your coach about it, but it gives you something that you can sort of chip away at, even if you don't race very much, or you don't, your racing isn't going perfect, you're very competitive races. At least you can take confidence in that you are getting better at this thing. And I think
that's the whole thing of like, you can never really use a race to gauge fitness, especially in cycling where there's so much tactic and like, gravel now drafting is such a thing. Like it's, yes, you might hit a PB on something, but that's not guaranteed. And it's really just not a great metric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're both sort of outcome goals, but the field test is a bit more pure, like power output. Sometimes we train and you don't get the physiological measures to move for a variety of reasons. And then we can adjust training based on that feedback. Whereas a race, like Molly's saying, you could have different people show up. You're always 10th, and then you train really hard, you get fitter, and then you actually end up 15th. And it's like, well, that wasn't what I was hoping was going to happen. But that could happen just because there's 5 more fit people there, or any other variety of reasons. It's technical in a different nature, and so maybe your power output is better, but now technically you got limited. Or Molly says, like, it's tactics. You just got beat on tactics. So these are all things that we can improve on, but it at least gives you some measures that you can say, okay, there's these somewhat controllable parts of training that we're getting better at. And so I like it for that. And then certainly with a lot of our older adults, they're not racing as much. So having just a little bit of that, it gives them a bit of a carrot, a bit of a competition to, again, just sort of assess how they're doing. But again, it doesn't need to be done every rest week, but I do think it's worth sort of sprinkling something like that through just to get it. And a lot of people use Strava. Like I say, Strava, it could be Zwift races, it can be Zwift Alp to Zwift. There's lots of ways to see progress on things that doesn't have to be super this exact test or this FTP test or this lactate test to see some progress for most people.
Love it. All right. Make sure you head to consummateathlete.com for the show notes. We also have an anonymous form there if you want to ask us a question. And of course, rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And with that, we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.